A relationship over Grindr. I peered over my book and at my overbearing friend. He was the one who insisted day and night I needed a ride. Honestly, I could understand him. He was probably tired of my whining by now. Even before his grinning face came into my view, I knew that he was going to say. That was why I did not bother to put down my book for his new set of suggestions. Most of the time, he had fantastical solutions to my problems. I knew this was not going to be any different. Why don't you try to blind date? I did it once, I replied with a sigh. And we know how it went. He sat down beside me. But every man's not going to be a disappointment, Nick. What if the next one turns out to be good? Then I will never know, I answered and flipped my page. I was at a very important event in the book, and I did not want to miss the excitement of reading those lines for the first time. But Graham had other things in mind. He wouldn't stop bothering me. Come with me to Chris's game. Maybe we'll find you a footballer. He wiggled his eyebrows. Chris was Graham's boyfriend. I told him just because he got lucky with one guy did not mean I would too. Besides, footballers never seemed like a good option. I interacted with one once and it was a nightmare, straight out of a legit horror movie. I would never take that chance again. No, I don't want a footballer boyfriend. Alright, he said, but come with me. We'll go out to eat. I was not very excited to hear that, so I merely focused on my book. Charlie's paying, Graham added. I grinned and put my book down. Now how could I say no to a free meal? 7 hours later, 3 of us were sitting at a local cafe, just as Graham had promised. Chris paid for our order. Having a rich boyfriend really helped in this case. I agreed. Initially, the conversation was focused on Chris and his game. Eventually, it turned to me. I knew it was coming long before Graham put out his first words, and Chris took delight in mentioning. He was our senior by a year and was currently in his final year. Maybe try Grindr, Chris suggested. But isn't that for one-night stands or something? I asked. He shrugged. Yes, indeed. A lot of men look for nothing but that, but there's always a good chance he may click with someone. What if he turns out to be a murderer? Graham asked. Take a chance, Chris answered and started laughing. Graham and I joined him. I don't know, I answered and rubbed my hands on the table. I tried blind dating once and it turned out to be hell in less than an hour. I cannot force you, Nick, Chris said. It's merely a suggestion, he sighed. Alright guys, I need to leave. See you later. I get that, I smiled at him. Graham turned to me the moment he was out of sight. Grindr, Nick, he said. What if it goes to hell? He merely grinned. The same night, when we reached home, Graham grabbed my phone from my study table and downloaded the app again. We were somewhat familiar with it, so I did not take him long to fill in my information. I did not put up a fight at all, although I did not participate in the procedure much. I couldn't deny that I was hopeful, that things would turn out well with someone. Let's do it, Nicky, Graham said and dropped down beside me. I want to sleep, I told him. Just 10 minutes? He insisted, and I couldn't say no. We sat down to scroll through it for the 10th time. In less than 10 minutes, I had 2 message notifications popping up on my screen. We looked at each other, and then Graham clicked on the notifications. We immediately shut down the app. Not yet, I told him. I want to talk first, dude. Yeah, he answered and dropped my phone on the bed as if we were burning. Should we try OkCupid instead? Any chances people will want to talk there first? I don't know. Let me sleep now. And so, I slept with my disappointment intact on my shoulders. The next day, I was on my way home from college when Graham reminded me that we were out of groceries. I sighed for the umpteenth time after that and found my way to the supermarket. To say the day was a mess would be an understatement, and having extra work pissed me off. Even so, I moved my steps into the supermarket, picked up a cart and dropped item after item into it. It was not long after I walked out of the supermarket that I realized I had forgotten my wallet. I panicked and turned to walk back into the supermarket with the hope that I would find it. However, the moment I turned around, I stumbled into a man. He steadied me and then told me that I must have forgotten my wallet. He handed me the wallet and asked me if I could check for all the contents. He wouldn't mind. I told him it was all right. I even thanked him. He smiled, nodded, and left me alone. And hell could have me if I didn't stare into his retreating figure until he disappeared. He was that handsome. I reached home and told Graham about it. We both grinned, screamed, and hoped that I would meet the guy again. For a few days after that, my Grindr app remained dormant. There were dumb messages, and I politely told a few of them that I wasn't exactly looking for a one-night stand. I was looking for it, but not right away. I had a history of going on a few dates first before sleeping with a man. I wasn't about to change that, no matter how hot Steve looked in the pictures. Just when I almost gave up on finding a boyfriend, on a dating app of all places, I received a message notification. It was around 12 and I had just finished reading my book. Even though I was tired and suspected it would be another waste of time, it wasn't so. As I laid down on my bed, my consciousness hanging off by a thread, I realized it was the same man who had returned my lost wallet. His name was Edmund. He was 27, some 6 years older than me, and worked as a software engineer. I scrolled through his profile and then messaged him some. It was a polite conversation at first, but I was so excited and happy that I nearly woke up my sleeping friend. I controlled myself somehow. Around 2, he told me that I should sleep. It was late, and he said he was sure I had a long day ahead. I swooned with such a display of care and kindness. All I had told him was that I was a uni student. I told him goodbye, and for the first time, I felt that things would finally change for me. In the morning, I informed Graham about it. Not a single peaceful moment passed after that. Edmund's job took most of his time, so the only time we got to talk was during the late night hours, when he returned from his job, and I was on the verge of falling asleep. We lived in the same city, and yet this was so hard. I was almost worried that it would never develop into something more than chatting. In desperation, I asked if we could meet. I remember smiling when I received the text, thank God. It was a simple text, but I could very well feel how relieved he felt by a single suggestion. Perhaps he was waiting for that too? I couldn't tell. We soon set up a date on Sunday. We were going to meet at a bar, and it was my friend Graham who made sure I looked my best. Even though Edmund and I had met once, Graham was still hopeful that I would leave an even better impression this time, and his grin told me he was hoping I would get lucky tonight. Go to his home, though, he added. I'm bringing Chris over. Even though I flipped him off, we knew I wanted to get lucky tonight too. Edmund was dressed formally when I saw him. It was almost as if he had just returned from his office. On a Sunday. At least he seemed casual about it. A few of his shirt buttons were left unopened, and I could see the carelessly tossed tie on the stool next to him. He had saved me a seat, I thought to myself. Even though it was a bare minimum, I felt touched at his awareness. The bar was crowded, so it took a few seconds to muster up the courage to approach him. Until then, I tried to understand him by his profile. His hair was unkempt, and his glasses were just as carelessly placed on the countertop in front of him. Even from this distance, I could see that he was tense about something. It was only our 4th week of interaction, and yet I planned to smooth out the worry lines on his face and tidy up his hair. I had to physically pull myself out of the reverie to not look creepy. Hi, I said, and ordered my favorite set of drinks. He turned to me. You're Nick, right? He asked and grinned. Whatever worry lines he had on his face started disappearing. He seemed much more relaxed now. I felt good, that it was because of me. It's for you, he said, and he grabbed his tie from the stool. I don't want to brag, but I had to fight a few people to save this one for you. Thanks, my savior, I said, and sat down. I appreciate that. I'm glad, he answered, and stretched out a hand for a handshake. Edmund. Nick, I replied, and took his hand in mine. But you already know that. Yes. Then he gave a little laugh. The rest of the date passed on as smoothly. There was little hiccup except for this time when I provoked him, and he started moaning curses at his job. But that was something I could relate to. My own uni wasn't being very kind to me, now that we were close to our final year. Eventually the clock hit 11, and I was bold enough to ask whose home we were going to. He laughed, sucked on his bottom lip for a second, and asked if I might going to his place. Any thoughts of going home with a potential serial killer escaped my mind. Edmund looked like a nice man and insanely friendly. It didn't help that he was so handsome. It was easier after that to work on our relationship. Within 2 weeks after that date, even though we had little time together, we spent them well. Edmund still had his job, and I still had my studies. There were still few conflicts between us given our schedules and experiences, but for the most part, it was working out really well. So well that by the 2nd week after our first date, we started leaving our items at each other's places. Graham said although he was happy for me, he was also worried that we were moving too fast, even though I felt the same. Considering the nature of Edmund's job, I did not want to confront it until we were at that stage. A few times when I had late classes, he would pick me up. It was during one of those drives to my home when I asked him if he wanted to date me officially. He took his sweet time answering, but honestly, I understood that it must have been a little too sudden. Even though a voice at the back of my mind nudged me, that we had been doing things that boyfriends did. I waited for his answer. When it came, I wasn't disappointed. Yes, he said. We should be boyfriends. I smiled and looked at him. He held my hand as he drove with the other one. But there's something important we need to talk about, Nick. And no, we cannot not talk about it, he added when he saw my expression. Okay, I answered. I wasn't really in the mood for any heavy talks. It was a long day at the college, and I was hungry. My awareness that Edmund was a good cook just made the wait more agonizing. What is it? I'm not here to stay, he said. I'm sorry, what does that mean? I was at this branch because of a project, he began again. It's a team project, and I happen to be the supervisor. The project's coming to an end, he added in a softer voice. I will soon have to leave. Leave the city? I asked. You work at another branch or something? He nodded at both. I sighed and didn't say anything. I didn't really have anything to say. Of course, if I could avoid it, I would have, Nick. I like being with you. I understand, I answered. But you're not going away right away, right? No, he answered. I guess we have more reasons to spend time together now. A week after. Of course, that did not mean we were able to spend more time together. Edmund's project was drawing to a close, and that demanded his attention and time. He was just as busy throughout the day, and we only spent whatever time we used to get before that conversation. On top of that, I had my exams coming at me in a few weeks. Surely we had little time to waste. I did not bother informing Graham in case he would start making logical arguments after that. I was in no mood for that. I needed to stay in my delusion. I understood it to be the only way to deal with the stress that came with the thought of losing Edmund. The next weekend after the conversation, we went on another date. After an excruciating hour spent at the planetarium, where devices did not function as they were supposed to, Edmund guided me to a little cafe. There were not too many people, and it made it easier to concentrate on each other. We had witnessed a couple's fight in the middle of the planetarium, and were just recovering from the shock of it. To say it was a terrible argument between them would have been an understatement. Edmund had jumped in when the guy tried to get a little physical with his partner. Edmund received a few blows before the guy was taken away, but he insisted he was okay. I told him I would order for us, and he could sit and relax. As worried as I was for him, I repeated quite a few times that what he did was really nice. And I found it hot, I added with some shame. I pursed my lips to not burst out in the laugh when he gave a huffed laughter and sipped on his coffee, but it wasn't a lie. I'm glad to know my torn bottom lip is turning you on, he joked. Oh hell no, you're making it sound terrible. I do not like to see you hurt. Thanks for the clarification, he said, and leaned against his seat. But I appreciate it, really, I said, and put forth the same old thing I had said to him a couple times by now. Even though I knew it was wrong, I knew it would have taken me a heck a ton of courage to even stand up to him. It was no different for me, he said, and placed his cup neatly on the table. But I've seen what not doing anything can do, and I'm not really willing to take a chance on that ever again. Oh? I said. And that was how I got to know about his abusive family relationships. It wasn't very long ago that he was uncomfortable with admitting he was gay. A few years ago, when he had revealed his sexuality to his parents, his father got upset and blamed Edmund's mom for the failure. The fight that happened between them was in Edmund's absence. He was at work when the police called him. His dad had killed his mother after a fight over his sexuality. Edmund said his greatest regret was not standing up for himself and his mother when he still had the time. In his words, he was still afraid. His father was charged with murder and was now spending 7 years behind bars. I genuinely hope someone kills him there, Edmund muttered bitterly. We were walking home. It was late evening and the winds were a little cool. I shivered against the wind, but did not say anything about it. Edmund was clearly in pain, and I did not want him to feel I was feeling bored of him. He deserves worse for what he did, I provided. Edmund jerked in surprise as if he just noticed I was by his side. Oh, he said, and laughed. Jesus, sorry, I forgot for a moment. Makes sense, I replied and told him I wasn't offended. He sighed and looked at me. Are you cold? Of course you're cold, here. He removed his coat and dropped it over my shoulder. I protested, but he said he was wearing thermal clothes underneath. It's no worry, if they don't work after, I paid so much for them. I'm going to file a case. Even though I laughed at it, I knew he was curious enough to do that. A couple of hours later, I found myself on Edmund's bed. What are your plans after college? Edmund asked just when I was about to drop dead. Thank God he had closed the windows. Even though winter wasn't at its peak, the cool winds threatened to get me sick. Being naked under the sheets just made it worse. Even though Edmund's warm body helped me a lot. God, I muttered sleepily. Do we really want to talk about this now? We don't have to if you don't want to. Of course, he answered. I was merely wondering. He rubbed a thick hand on my head. I sighed in comfort. Head caress always drove me crazy. Nothing? Nothing, Edmund echoed after a minute. His voice sounded drowsy as well. I don't know what the hell to do with my life, I answered, a little aware now that my existential crisis was threatening to hit me with full force. I have no vision, I have no dreams. I just am. Edmund held me before I could wriggle out of his hold. Hey now, he said. I'm sorry for provoking this out of you at such a late hour, but being yourself is not a bad thing, he said. He looked into my eyes. You're still very young, Nick. Enough time to get to understand yourself. 21, I said. Not too late, he replied. Relax now. Then he rubbed his fingers onto my scalp. I will help you with it, he repeated a few times. And then I slept peacefully in his arms. But that was just the beginning of trouble for me. A week later, and even without wanting to, I vomited out the entire thing to Graham. He seemed a little troubled at first as well, but then he suggested a long-distance relationship. He said there was always a good chance that it would work out, for me. Geez, are we really playing by chance now? I asked. We have to, he answered. But just because it would be LDR doesn't mean it was going to be bad. It's definitely difficult, but if you like him so much, then it would not hurt to try. What if we take a break? I asked. It stumped Graham, and we went silent for a while. Dude, I don't want to say anything stupid, but wouldn't that just ruin the spark? That was something even I had thought of several times. Taking an official break from the relationship meant none of us would have to be loyal to each other. And who knew what kind of future that decision would have? I did not want to take that chance. Yet I wondered if it would hurt less than a long-distance relationship. So even though Graham said that I shouldn't suggest any of that to Edmund, I did. As ashamed as I was to admit it, I did so. Edmund had a similar expression on his face when he heard my idea. I don't understand, he began. Everything's going well between us. We have just started to know each other, Nick. A break will hurt this relationship. But I don't want to get hurt when you leave, I said, and I could barely hold back the tears threatening to spill out of my eyes. We were just some weeks into our relationship, and it already hurt so much. So imagining him in some other state with 100 different mature gay men sounded horrible. Oh baby, he said softly. I want a break, Edmund. Maybe we can pick it up later. You cannot decide this on your own, Nick, he insisted and held my wrist before I could leave. I'm leaving in 2 days, and you cannot do this now. I don't even have the time now. I still have your contact, I said stupidly. Some part of me was aware whatever I was doing was out of fear, and I would regret it in less than an hour. But I wanted to play on my whim, to see how I would be able to cope with the separation from Edmund. I will contact you, Edmund. I'm not forgetting you. As stupid as I was, I removed my hand from his hold and walked out of there. Graham couldn't believe it when I told him about it the next day. He spent the entire day wondering how his friend could be so stupid as to not understand the basics. He suggested maybe it was because I had forgotten how to be in a relationship. I told him he needed to focus on his studies, and although he agreed, he also kept repeating that I shouldn't take a risk after finally finding a good guy. I waved him off and tried to focus on my studies. I couldn't do that. Just a little more than a day was left before Edmund would leave the state, and I was growing desperate after the stunt I had pulled. If I hadn't done that, we would have spent the last 2 days with each other. I was stupid enough to ruin that. When the evening fell and I couldn't sleep anymore, I got up from bed and grabbed my phone, sneaked out of my shared apartment with Graham, and booked a ride to Edmund's. It was somewhere around 1, and although I understood the dramatics of it, I couldn't say that I wasn't desperate enough to take this measure. Edmund's flight was at 11, and I knew he would not have the time tomorrow. I called his number and hoped he would not be upset. I rang his doorbell and hoped he would not get pissed off, even though he had every right to. He opened the door and justly looked sleepy as hell. I felt so bad. I was ready to run out of there after apologizing, but contradictory to the sensible thought, I stayed, standing there and let him see me. It took him some 2 minutes to realize it was me, and he gave a little yawn and pulled me into his home. Gosh, it's cold outside, he said and pulled me onto his bedroom. Let's get you warm. Do you want something hot to drink? He asked and made a move as if he would immediately walk into the kitchen if I so much as nodded. I shook my head. I wanted to talk, I said instead. Oh, he said. You can start with an apology. Then he grinned. But I didn't take any offense to that. He was right. I had unnecessarily caused tension and stress. Then a simple conversation would have saved it. I'm sorry, I began carefully. I thought it made sense if we stayed away because you were going to leave me anyways. But then I couldn't stop thinking about you. Even though it sounds selfish, Edmund, I think I love myself a little too much to not take this chance for you. I don't want to hurt myself. Then I grinned up at him. He gave a laugh and a huff. Incredibly selfish, Mr. Nick. He grinned and sat down by my side. The bed was still warm, and I was once again gripped by guilt that I had woken him up from sleep just for my nonsense. But Edmund didn't look like he cared much for that. He held my hand on his own and gave it a little squeeze. I get you're worried how things would work out like that, but I promise if we try hard enough, it will work. There were a lot of things I was worried about besides that, namely that would happen if we fell out of love in between. Surely no one would give a guarantee that it would work out if two lovers were living so far from each other, and I told him the same. We can never be sure about the future, Nick, he said thoughtfully. So? I asked. So we can try to make now better. And although what he said was right and made sense, I wanted to remind him that we didn't really have a lot of time together right now. He would leave in less than 12 hours, and I couldn't say when we would meet after that. I would have to focus on my last 2 semesters, and he would be busy doing a software engineering in another darn state. But I didn't want to start another trouble today, so I asked him if he wanted to drink tea. We were sure to get a good sleep after that. He nodded, ruffled my hair, and then helped me in the kitchen. Oh God, you lazy arse, Graham said some 2 days after Edmund left. He then proceeded to kick my butt to wake me up from the stupor I frequently fell into these days. 2 days in and I was going brainless. It was almost as if Edmund had taken my happiness with himself. My energy sucked and so did my vibe. What do you want? I asked closer to my messenger. He's not going to message just because you're staring at it, Graham added, and then plopped down beside me. Try to focus on studies. It's our final year. I hate studying, I grumbled. No, you don't, and your good grades prove me right. He's not going to forget you. Even I can promise you that. Oh, I don't fear that, all right, I answered. Then what do you fear? He curiously asked. I fear other people, I replied. That's like saying you do not believe Edmund can be loyal. But that wasn't it. My fear would prove me right several months later. It was during my semester's exam when Edmund video called me at around 7 in the evening. He was at a company party arranged to celebrate their latest successful project. Edmund basically meant he was earning well and the business was going amazing. As good as it sounded, I couldn't ignore the guy on Edmund's left. He had his hand on my boyfriend's thigh and was constantly leaning in to shout something in his ear. Oftentimes, Edmund laughed at whatever inside joke it was. I glared at him. Edmund noticed the hand on his thigh and politely pushed it away. I think you need to be in a quieter place because I'm going to show you something nice, I advised and wiggled my eyebrows. He grinned and tried to make his way out of the crowd made out of his colleagues, but before he could leave, the same guy grabbed his wrist and told him not to leave for home without taking him with him. My hackles rose. I was pissed off and annoyed. Can't he keep his fucking hands off you? I complained the moment he was in a quieter place. Edmund merely shook his head and waved away my worry. I began to say, but he hushed me. I love you, he shouted into the microphone and grinned. Wow, I replied, now speechless. Just wow. He gave a little laugh, and even though he was smiling, I could see the tense expression on his face. He was probably worried I would not return to sentiments or worse. No, I love you too, he grinned. Now that's what you wanted to show me. But it wasn't limited to that. As my final semester bordered on unhinged energy, I found Edmund busier with his work. In the first month of my final semester, we talked only thrice. It was agonizing. An entire month and only 3 times that we talked. What was worse was that Edmund said he would get busier still because of another project. I felt annoyed. How many projects did that man handle? Sure, his dressing sense and his condo gave an indication of how much he earned. But still. The thing that made it worse was how many times I saw that party guy with Edmund. When I couldn't hold it any longer, I asked my boyfriend to explain who that guy was. Surely they weren't that close for the guy to casually rub my boyfriend's hair when he was busy on a video call with me. It was almost like I was being provoked on purpose. And I hated how it controlled my emotions. Edmund's relaxed expression didn't help much. He's Sam, Edmund said over the call. My best friend of 19 years. Oh, I replied and blushed a deep shade of red. I thought... He's just messing with you, Edmund added with a smile. Don't worry about him. He just wants to meet you. And these are all his strategies to force you to come here. To live with you? I asked. He took a moment to reply. The state's great, he replied finally and with a little bit of nervousness. And I would have to have you here with me. but that does not mean I'm going to force you to come here. I know you've studied, and that's just as important." He blabbered on, but I knew it wasn't a bad plan. In fact, I knew it would do us good. I had lived in the city for nearly 13 years of my life, and never did I think it would be productive to live here. Heck, my dad made a fortune outside of this place, and I hoped getting out of here would do me good too. Even so, I did not tell Edmund about it. It was my last semester, and I wanted to keep it a surprise. "Be honest, Graham," said when he finished telling him my plans. "About what?" I asked. "You're only going to make sure that he doesn't cheat." "No," I replied. "Why would you say that?" "Why would I say that?" He repeated my question. "Think about it, Nikki. If Edmund's really worrying you so much, should you still be in a relationship with him?" "But he hasn't done anything wrong," I answered. "Then why do you not trust him?" "It's not about trust," I replied. "He's my first boyfriend in a long while, and he's perfect. I don't want to lose him because some idiot. But more than that, I want to be with him." I held his hand. "I know I sound worried, but I feel it's probably because it's a long-distance relationship, and I want this to work out between us." "It will," Graham replied. "Just relax." And relax I did. 2 days after my exams were over, I hauled my bag and reached the state Edmund was in. Because I did not know his address, I had no other option but to wait outside his company, with my bags around me. I waited for him to come out. It was insane what I was doing. There was a good enough chance that he didn't come to work today, and even though I could call and confirm from him, I didn't want to take the risk of spoiling it. The evening fell and I noticed him walking out around 7 p.m. He was with 3 people. One was Sam, and I did not know the other one. The guy had his arm wrapped around Edmund and was constantly making kissy faces at him. Jealousy got the best of me. I called him to check if he would pick up. He did, and whatever I asked, he replied with the truth. I realized with shame once again that I was unnecessarily worrying. Just before hanging up, he saw me. I waved at him. My parents should have heard his scream of delight. This man right here loved me. Conclusion. Edmund and I decided to live together after that. He still had his shitload of work almost every day of the week, and his boss still dropped work on him day after day. It was painful to see him so stressed, but we made it work all right. We did not get much time together, but it was more possible to return home and see each other after a long day at work. I first started working at a local flower shop. Now that might change soon. The end. Are all long-distance relationships worth it? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become part of our Rainbow Force and stay wholesome.